A Patreon member sent me this lovely photo of Wyken Vineyard in Suffolk, and I said I'd have a go at it. I'll see if I can make a painting from it. Now, I'm not going to do anything in the way of cropping as such, but I'll move a few things about. I'll bring the water level or the water line down to roughly a third, and the distance, the horizon line, I'll bring that down. I'll get a little bit more sky in there. But apart from that, I'm going to pretty much stay fairly true to the photograph. I did a simple sketch, and you can see there I brought the water line down, and I'm going to treat everything as simple shapes, and I'm going to use the ghost wash method for this one. And so that involves wetting the paper all over and bringing what is essentially a graded wash over the whole sheet, but strategically adding little areas of local colour. So some little bits of colour in the trees and the grasses and the water and the sky and everything like that, but allowing it to be one big soft wash. So I brought some water over the whole sheet, and I'll start with the sky. So I'll pick up some cobalt blue, and lay in a very simple sky. Don't want too much, there's quite a bit going on in the land. So a very basic rule of thumb really is if you've got quite a lot going on in the land and it's quite busy, you want a very simple sky really. So I won't do anything more than that for the sky, and I'll reflect some of that same colour down into the water, and I'll put that in now. So really very simply laid in, and now pick up some raw sienna. I'll start working on some of the trees and the grasses and all the reeds around the edge of the pond. I'll put all of those in one wash, varying the colour as I go. So I've got some blue and some raw sienna. The colour's not overly important at this stage, but it's a good idea to get, or think of it as painting the lightest elements that you see. So more cobalt blue, raw sienna, and looking at the overall shape of the trees and the hedgerow and everything like that, and joining it all together in one wash. A little bit more raw sienna. So every time I go back to the palette, change that mixture ever so slightly. So I paint the light across the top of that hedge. A little bit more blue in there now. So ever so slightly darker as I come down, and there's lots of little grasses and reeds and bushes and things. I'm not going to paint those individually. I'll treat it all as one big shape. Drop a little bit of viridian in there now so I can get quite green. Neutralise that with some raw sienna. Makes quite a nice earthy green, but it's still got a little bit of a glow about it. And so laying in some of these grasses at the edge of the pond, drag some of that down into the water as well, so paint some of the reflection as well as I go. A little bit more cobalt blue, a bit more raw sienna, make that green a little bit darker. And so really at this stage I'm thinking of laying in the lightest tones, and I can get some of those mid-tones in there as well, all within this first wash. A little bit more raw sienna, and continue this wash out towards the left hand side. Again, drag some of that down in for some reflections. Touch a tiny little bit of cadmium yellow in there as well. So trying to get a good variation in these greens. Don't want to paint one flat green over the whole thing. Get as much variation in there as possible. A little bit of ultramarine in there now, a little bit burnt sienna, so getting quite deep now. A little bit of viridian in there as well, so quite a deep green. There's a little bit of light across the top of that little pontoon decking area. I'll see if I can preserve a little bit of that. I might be able to work with that in the next stage, so it's a good idea to leave a little bit of that behind now. I can always cover it up if I need to. I've got some ultramarine, a bit more raw sienna, a little bit more cadmium yellow as well, a bit of burnt sienna as well, a little bit of everything now. So it's getting quite dark, and I can bring some of that across for this tree. Again, painting it all while the paper's still wet as well, so everything's going to become soft and quite ghostly. That's why I call it the ghost wash. And now I want to pretty much paint this whole shape of this tree in one go, but there's some reeds on the left hand side, so I can cut around that shape with this darker mid-tone. A bit more blue into that mixture now. Again, getting a little bit of variation every time I go back. A touch of raw sienna in there as well, a bit more viridian. Now I'll start working on some of those reeds. So I've got some raw sienna, a little bit of viridian, a little bit of cadmium yellow. I can get away with making these fairly bright, right down in the foreground. So I can lay some of that in. Can leave a few little light areas behind as well. And same on the right hand side, little bits of grasses and reeds. I've altered the shape of that foreground ever so slightly from the photograph, but not too much. A bit more variation with some burnt sienna in there. Now just before I dry it, I think I'll add some distant trees. Now the paper's still slightly damp, so this will all soften off, but I'm just going to use a slightly toned down blue mixture, a little bit of cobalt blue, a little bit of ultramarine. And now I don't want to overcomplicate things by painting too much detail in the distance. Give the painting a sense of depth and a little bit of aerial perspective by keeping these shapes very simple and cooler and very soft in tone as well, so they recede off into the distance. Got to make sure I don't overcomplicate any of this though, because it's in the distance, so keep it simple. And now I'll dry that first wash. Okay, it's dried, and I think hopefully you can see why I call it the ghost wash. It's like a ghostly figure of everything in the painting, all laid down in one go. And I can bring that together now by adding shadows and some darks and a few little hard edges to give everything a little bit of context and bring it all together. So I put a little bit of water over with the mist bottle, and I can pick up pretty much the same colours as I used in the first wash, but making them ever so slightly darker and laying in some of those shadow shapes and leaving a few little hard edges behind this time. So touch a little bit of ultramarine in there. Don't want to make too much of this tree on the right hand side. A bit more blue, a little bit of burnt sienna. Again, treating all these shadows as one big shape as well, so joining everything together. Don't want anything standing out too much on its own. But dragging the paint around using a sable brush, using the side of the brush and then the tip of the brush as well, so using the whole brush. And making sure I leave tiny little areas of texture behind, but not too much. Not too many hard edges going on. Just enough really to bring everything together. Some greys in the palette as well, can pick a lot of that up. Now a little bit more burnt sienna, a bit more cobalt, a little bit of ultramarine as well. So I'm getting slightly darker now as I come down to the edge of the water. I can join these shadow shapes in with the tree above, making tiny little connections everywhere I go. And I can allow the paint to break up a little bit on the paper as well, so tiny little areas of dry brush, little bits of texture. And because most of the work is done in that first wash, it's quite a simple task now really, just adding some darks and some hard edges to bring it all together, and hopefully in the finished painting it will look like a finished painting and all cohesive, all joined together. So laying in more dark shadows in these little reeds at the edge of the pond and some darks in that hedgerow. Let's drag some fairly dark paint up as well, and I can drag that down at the same time for their reflections. But making sure I don't overstate everything, keep everything very simple. I don't really like to paint detail as such, it's really all about the illusion of detail. So bring that shape over for this little decking pontoon area. I've left that tiny little highlight behind as well from the first wash. I've used a tiny bit of that. So continue the shape of this little hedge and these bushes. Leave some of the light behind for that little deck area. Joining all these shapes in, painting the reflections at the same time. With literally just one drag down with the brush is enough to suggest that reflection. Mix up some fairly dark paint now, some ultramarine and burnt sienna, and touch back in and add the darkest shadow area where the reeds meet the water. Let's swap back to a slightly larger brush, and I'll start working on this large tree now. I'm going to keep that fairly grey, almost black, with ultramarine, burnt sienna. I can get that fairly dark. And because I've already painted those lighter areas in there, I can get away with being very loose with this and be quite expressive with the brush marks. Now, I'm not looking too closely at the reference, just having a little glance and then really just painting the shape as quickly as possible. And leaving behind little areas of that first wash as well, shining through behind. And I like mixing darks out of ultramarine and burnt sienna because it retains a certain amount of transparency as well. So if I'd use something like a Payne's Grey, it has a tendency to go a little bit opaque, especially if you mix other paints in with it. But now using this dark shape to paint the light on the top of those reeds on the left hand side. So a little bit of negative painting there, leaving behind that little glowing area behind the pontoon as well, so some light shining through from behind. Varying these darks as well every time I go back, a little bit more blue, a bit more burnt sienna. And so it's just a series of dark shapes to make up the overall illusion of a tree. Now let's join these darks in to everything else. It's like a bench or something behind there. I don't want to make too much of that either. I think that might overcomplicate things, so I'll leave that out. Let's bring down some reflection of this tree now. Again, very simply suggested, brought down in one go. Can suggest some of the shadow areas in the reeds as well. Can get away with my sort of darkest, hardest areas right down in the foreground as well, and that helps to push everything back a little bit. I'll just swap to a small brush now. Mix up some more dark, so more ultramarine, more burnt sienna. Mix it up a tiny little bit darker now, so it's almost black, and let's get the suggestion of some little branches in this tree. If I lay that in while it's still wet, some of it will soften off as well, and I won't get too hard an edge there. And that brush was a little bit small, so I've gone up a size. It's a size 4 sable now. A bit more burnt sienna, more ultramarine again, and it suggests some darker areas for a few little branches. I don't want to do too much of this really. I think the shape on its own tells a story of a tree. I don't need to overdo it with branches and things like that. So let's just suggest a few, flicking the brush out. Same on the right hand side, but not as much over there. Like I said before, I don't want to make too much of this tree really. It would detract from everything else, but a few little branches in there just pulls it together, I think. And let's drag some of this strong dark around. Like I said, there's like a little bench or something there in the photo. But I think that's enough to suggest that really, just a few little dark marks. So some more very strong dark paint now. Get my darkest elements in, joining left to right, painting some of those reeds there at the edge of the water, up for the reed and then down for the reflection in one go. And the darkest elements of shadow in there as well, over there on the right. So at this stage it's all about making sure I've got little connections all over the painting, join all the darks together in one way or another. It doesn't have to be a hard edge, but little edges, tiny little areas of contact with all the darks around, joining the whole painting together. A few more dark edges just down in this foreground. Now it's getting to the stage where I have to be careful that I don't put in too much of this kind of stuff because it can really overcomplicate a foreground. It's best to paint as little as you can get away with really. So let's mix up some very thick dark paint now. Got some cobalt blue and some burnt sienna. So we're almost black really with this paint, but really quite thick. Just squeeze out some of the water from the brush as well, because I'm going to lay this straight over the top. It's still slightly damp on there as well, and I don't want it to run, so make sure there's hardly any water in the brush. And I can get some of these posts in on this pontoon. Now I think I have to be mindful I don't make the spacing between them too even. I think there's always something about posts, if you make the spacing between them the same, somehow looks odd, even though they're measured and they are the same distance in the photograph. Something about putting them in on a painting, it's best to move things around a little bit and make things slightly asymmetrical. Let's grab some of that grey in the palette as well, and I can put the reflections in for these posts. Very simple little suggestion, little wavy line. Okay, I think that's enough for the reflection. Keep everything very simple. And let's drag a little bit more dark just under the bottom of that pontoon. A few more little dark areas. And I think with that, that's the painting finished. I think I'll leave it alone. Okay, that's the finished painting. So I used the ghost wash technique for this one. Brought over a wash over the whole sheet, sky, trees, hedgerow, everything, water and all the reeds, all painted in one go. So it's kind of like a graded wash. We bring it all over the whole sheet, but then add in strategic areas of local colour to pick out the lightest and some of the mid-tones, and then you allow that to dry and then go over with your darks, painting in all your shadows and all your hard edges. Save all of that stuff for the second stage, and you get quite a nice cohesive look to a painting. Lots of soft edges and nice little blurred lines between all of the shapes. And so it's quite a useful technique. So do give it a go. Let me know how you get on and all that kind of stuff, and let me know if you've got any questions. Also, if you want me to paint your photographs, then join me over on Patreon. I've got a few different pricing options over there, so go and check that out. There's an exclusive video every week as well. But anyway, as always, thanks for watching everyone, and I'll see you next week. Cheers then.